right, hello guys. Welcome to the Connect Rally. This is definitely different this year than in previous years, I'm sure. This is actually the first one that I get to be a part of, so I'm super excited and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be with you, and I hope this touches you. So I was asked by Carmen to do a little class or a devotion on a topic of choice, and for a while I didn't know what I was going to speak on. I didn't know what I was going to do until last night when I was reading in my Bible. I was reading in the book of Romans, and I was reading chapter 4, and it talked about the faith of Abraham, and the previous chapter talked about God's faithfulness. Even when his people weren't faithful to him, he was still faithful, and he wasn't found a liar. And then I was reminded about the chapter in Hebrews chapter 11, that kind of gave us some examples of faith. And so I just kind of want to go through that chapter and just kind of break down faith and talk about the importance of faith and some of the examples of people who expressed faith in this chapter is Abraham. He was a great example of faith, but so was Sarah, and so was Noah. And so let's just get started. So Hebrews chapter 11, and I'm reading out of the NLT. It's one of my favorite versions if you want to follow along. So here we go. Faith is a confidence that what we hope for will actually happen. It gives us assurance about things we cannot see. Through their faith, the people in days of old earned a good reputation. By faith, we understand that the entire universe was formed at God's command, that what we now see did not come from anything that can be seen. So faith is a confidence that what we hope for will actually happen. So faith starts with confidence, and it starts with hope. We can't have faith if we don't have hope, because if we're not hoping in anything, we won't have faith in anything. There's nothing to have faith for. And we find our confidence for our faith in Jesus Christ, because he's the one who paid it all. God is the one who created the universe. And so if we have no faith in him, if we have no confidence in him, we won't have faith. By faith, we understand that the entire universe was formed. We believe by reading in Genesis that God formed the universe by speaking. And so we didn't see the creation. We didn't see God speaking things into creation, but now we can see creation all around us, and we believe that God did that. And it was by faith that Abel brought a more acceptable offering to God than Cain did. Abel's offering gave evidence that he was a righteous man, and God showed his approval of his gifts. Although Abel is long dead, he still speaks to us by his example of faith. It was by faith that Enoch was taken up to heaven without dying. He disappeared because God took him. For before he was taken up, he was known as a person who pleased God. And it is impossible to please God without faith. Anyone who wants to come to him must believe that God exists and that he rewards those who sincerely seek him. So without faith, it's impossible to please God, because we have to have faith in God. We have to believe that he is God and that he created the earth. And without that, we have no way of pleasing God. It was by faith that Noah built a large boat to save his family from the flood. He obeyed God, who warned him about things that had never happened before. By his faith, Noah condemned the rest of the world, and he received the righteousness that comes by faith. So I just want to stop there, because I have that scripture underlined in my Bible. It says that by his faith, Noah condemned the rest of the world. He knew that the world had nothing to offer him. He knew that he could not hope in this world because it was fleeting, it was passing away, and that if he didn't listen to the voice of God, then it would be the end for him and his family. So he had such a hope in God that he condemned the world because he knew the one who held the world. And so he was obedient to the voice of the Father, and I just thought that was amazing. I had never really picked out that verse before, but when I was reading it last night, it really stood out to me that he condemned the rest of the world just because he had heard the voice of God. And he acted on his faith in God. And so that's super important. And it was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went to a foreign land. He didn't know anybody there. He didn't know what it was going to be like, but he acted in faith, knowing that God would provide and that God had a perfect plan and purpose and that he would be there with him to see him through the whole way. He went without knowing where he was going, and even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith, for he was like a foreigner living in tents. And so did Isaac and Jacob, who inherited the same promise. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. It was by faith that even Sarah was able to have a child, though she was barren and was too old. She believed that God would keep his promise. If that isn't an example of crazy faith, I don't know what is. Old and barren, but still believing God for a child. Because we know that he who promised is faithful. And so a whole nation came from this one man who was as good as dead. A nation with so many people that, like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore, there is no way to count them. All these people died still believing what God had promised them. They did not receive what was promised, but they saw it all from a distance and welcomed it. They agreed that they were foreigners and nomads here on earth. Obviously, people who say such things are looking forward to a country that they can call their own. If they had longed for a country they came from, they could have gone back. But they were looking for a better place, a heavenly homeland. That is why God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. It was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac a sacrifice, trusting him. Abraham, who had received God's promises, was ready to sacrifice his only son Isaac. That's crazy to me. Abraham, I don't think, could have gotten any closer to living by the example of Jesus. He was ready to sacrifice his own son, a promise that he had waited years for, just to be obedient to the will of God. Even though God had told him, Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. He didn't see, but he believed, because faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. He didn't see how God was going to work it out. He didn't know that there would be a perfect animal ready to be sacrificed on that altar, walking up that hill that day. He just knew that God had spoken to him, and he followed the voice of the Father. Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life again. And in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead. It was by faith that Isaac promised blessings for the future to his sons Jacob and Esau. It was by faith that Jacob, when he was old and dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and bowed in worship as he leaned on his staff. It was by faith that Joseph, when he was about to die, said confidently that the people of Israel would leave Egypt. He even commanded them to take his bones with them when they left. It was by faith that Moses' parents hid him for 3 months when he was born, because they saw that God had given them an unusual child, and they were not afraid to disobey the king's command. So just, I want to stop there, because for 3 months, I had never really paid attention to that fact before, because I read through this chapter before and forth throughout the years. But 3 months, they hid a child that was supposed to be dead. The firstborn that was supposed to be killed. He was hid for 3 months because of a purpose God had placed over his life, and his parents knew that, and they were willing to do whatever it took to keep him alive. It's that kind of faith that moves mountains. It's that kind of faith that shakes the foundations of the earth and moves the heart of the Father. It's a crazy faith, an amazing faith, a faith that we should strive for day in and day out. And it was by faith that Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to share the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. Faith will take us much farther than the fleeting pleasures of sin, because our pleasures only last but a moment. The earth is fleeting, sin is fleeting, everything this world has to offer is fleeting. And so if we walk in faith, we have eternity in our grasp, eternity to look forward to. He thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to his great reward. It was by faith that Moses left the land of Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He kept right on going because he kept his eyes on the one who is invisible. It was by faith that Moses commanded the people of Israel to keep the Passover and to sprinkle blood on the doorpost, so that the angel of death would not kill their firstborn sons. It was by faith that the people of Israel went right through the Red Sea as though they were on dry ground. But when the Egyptians tried to follow, they were all drowned. It was by faith that people of Israel marched around Jericho for 7 days, and the walls came crashing down. It was by faith that Rahab the prostitute was not destroyed with the people in her city who refused to obey God, for she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. I think it's crazy that it talks about a prostitute hiding the spies in the city. I think sometimes we can be so quick to decide who God can use, but God used a prostitute. God used Moses' parents. God used an old lady who was supposed to be barren. God used an old man to be the father of many nations. It's just crazy who he uses. And all it takes is a little bit of faith. It takes a mustard seed faith. And with that, we can move mountains, and we can heal the sick, and we can cause the blind to see, and we can raise the dead. The Lord said that greater things would we do in his name than he did when he was here on this earth. So we have that power that lives within us, and all it takes is a little bit of faith. Faith is a foundation for our lives. It is necessary to living day in and day out, because without faith we can't please God. Without faith we don't have any purpose, any reason to move forward. We don't have any purpose in this life without faith. We need faith. Let's see. How much more do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of faith. Of the faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and all the prophets. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms. They ruled with justice, and they received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions. They quenched the flames of fire and escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle and put whole armies to flight. Women received their loved ones back again from death. I didn't have very many notes to go with this. I kind of just wanted to go through this chapter, but some of the notes I did have written down going through this were, when we have faith, we're not afraid of our enemies. When we have faith, walls fall down. When we have faith, lives are saved. Lions' mouths are shut. Flames don't burn us or consume us or even leave the stench of smoke on our clothing when we come out. Death is defeated and seas are parted. Nothing is impossible for God. Nothing is impossible for God. But without faith, we cannot please God. And I want to skip down to verse 39 and 40, and then that's the last two verses of the chapter. All these people earned a good reputation because of their faith, yet none of them received all that God had promised, for God had something better in mind for us, so that they would not reach perfection without us. And then I want to go to Romans 3 and 4, and I just want to pick out a couple parts that kind of go along with faith. I was talking about it earlier, about God's faithfulness and Abraham's faith. And so it talks about in Romans chapter 3, verse 3, I'll start there. It said, "True, some of them were unfaithful, but just because they were unfaithful, does that mean God will be unfaithful? Of course not. Even if everyone else is a liar, God is true. As the scriptures say about him, you will be proved right in what you say, and you will win your case in court." So it just points out God's faithfulness to us even when we're not faithful. So why not be faithful to him? Because he deserves that much of us. And then in chapter 4, let's get down to verse 3. "For the scriptures tell us, Abraham believed God, and God counted him as righteous because of his faith." I don't know about you, but I want to be counted righteous in the sight of God because of my faith, because I chose to believe him even when I did not see, because I chose to walk even when I did not see, that nothing could hinder the plan of God on my life, because I believed he was who he said he was, and I am who he says I am, and that I'm more than enough, and I'm more than a conqueror, and that greater things I will do here on earth in his name than he did when he walked the earth. And we need that kind of faith to tap into the full potential and the full anointing that God has placed on our lives. Faith is essential. It is so essential. And then I'm going to skip over, still in verse 4 of Romans, chapter 4 of Romans. I want to skip over to verse 11. The end of the verse says, "They are counted as righteous because of their faith." And then down in verse 16 it says, "So the promise is received by faith." So we receive God's promises by faith. We have to have faith that God's promises are true. And then skip down. And it's talking about how God made Abraham the father of many nations in verse 17. And it says, "This happened because Abraham believed in the God who brings the dead back to life and who creates new things out of nothing. Even when there was no reason for hope, Abraham kept hoping, believing that he would become the father of many nations. For God had said to him, that's how many descendants you would have." So even when Abraham didn't see, he had faith to believe that God spoke and it would be so, just as he did when he formed the earth. When creation began to spin in motion through his words, he knew that if the earth had to obey and form when God spoke, he knew he had to have the faith that God, having spoken this promise over him, would perform it. So, yeah, that's all I have. I hope that this was encouraging. I hope it all made sense and came together. And I thank you all for joining us, and I hope you guys are staying safe and healthy, and I pray that you all are blessed. Thank you. See you guys.